Answers in writing. Is this whole saga nearing an end? Former Clinton independent counsel Ken Starr is here as well. And if you're one of the millions of Americans flying home tomorrow, you could be in for some nasty weather, but we've got you covered. Cavuto Live starts right now. Shoppers storming the malls and the web hunting for bargains right now. I'm David Asman, in for Neil Cavuto. We're glad you could join us today. Fox Business Network's Susan Lee starts it off on how the sales are shaping up. Hi, Susan.
Americans are spending, David, maybe not in the traditional sense where you see the long lineups in the early morning hours or the fisticuffs to get their hands on the first 4K televisions. But I can tell you Americans have been taking out their wallets. They've been using their plastic and they've been ordering up. But let's take you through the latest numbers that we have. Adobe Analytics, which tracks 80 major online retailers, tells us that sales are up 28% from last year. And on Thanksgiving Day alone, online sales crossed over $3 billion. A lot of that is being done online. 54% of the online orders are being done on your mobile phone. So this is now an omni-channel world that we live in. Now, it's expected to be a very strong holiday shopping season. I'll throw in Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and Christmas. We're expected to see our first $1 trillion spending season. 60% of Americans are doing more of that online. And when it comes to the average consumer, thanks to the tax cuts, a strong economy, and also confidence in the jobs market, consumers will spend $300 more per person this year at $1,500 and change. Now, today, on this Saturday, it is also Small Business Saturday. $13 billion spent last year. 83% of consumers that do intend to shop this weekend will be doing it at a small business, and 6 in 10 Americans are aware of the holiday. And so far, indications are, David, that we are looking at some strong numbers. Kohl's says it was record-breaking on Thursday. Walmart says traffic has been steady. Macy's, strong online all day. And Macy's can also thank the strength from that online, from the parade as well, driving a lot of traffic through to their flagship store on 34th Street at Herald Square here. But, shoppers, the frenzy is on. Back to you.
Frenzy's on, even with all the wind and the cold in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. We'll see you in a moment. While shoppers hit the stores, some analysts worry that's not enough to hold off a recession. Yes, they're using that word, but the White House thinks very differently. Fox News correspondent Brian Yennis is in West Palm Beach near Mar-a-Lago, where the president's spending his holiday. Hi, Brian.
Hey, good morning, David. Well, we know that the president looks at the economy and the stock market as a bellwether for success for his administration. The good news is, as you just heard from Susan Lee, Americans are spending their money. 54 million Americans traveling this Thanksgiving holiday, the highest number in 13 years. Black Friday sales approaching record numbers. The bad news is that the stock market had one of its worst weeks of the year. The Dow dropping 4.4%. The S&P 500 now in correction territory. And so now the Wall Street Journal is reporting that President Trump has become more and more unhappy and dissatisfied with the Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin over these ups and downs and these declines in the stock market. Fox and the Wall Street Journal share common ownership, and the Journal reports Trump is blaming Mnuchin for appointing Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Trump has publicly said he is not happy with the Fed's decision to hike up interest rates. In fact, the president has said he thinks interest rates are rising too quickly and are the biggest threat to this economy. This was the president a few weeks ago on Fox Business talking about Powell's interest hikes.
No, my biggest threat is the Fed, because the Fed is raising rates too fast, and it's independent, so I don't speak to him, but I'm not happy with what he's doing because it's going too fast, because you looked at the last inflation numbers, they're very low.
Since Powell took office in February of this year, the Fed has risen interest rates 3 times, from 1.5% in March to 2.75% in September. Higher interest rates means it's more expensive to borrow money and could affect spending. And on Wednesday, when the Fed chairman Jerome Powell, he's expected to address the Economic Club of New York, a ton of economists will be looking to see if another hike is in store in December. Now, last night, the president tweeted the Journal's reporting on Mnuchin was not true. The president tweeting, quote, "I am extremely happy and proud of the job being done by U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. The fake news likes to write stories to the contrary, quoting phony sources or jealous people, but they aren't true. They never like to ask me for a quote because it would kill their story. Now, some say weighing more heavily on the market is actually the trade dispute between China and the United States, those tariffs. And according to the Wall Street Journal, Mnuchin has been on the side of trying to come up with a quick compromise, something that has drawn the ire of the president. And one last thing, David, the president, speaking on Thanksgiving, said that he is interviewing some folks for a couple, maybe a few positions, though he did not name which positions in his cabinet he's interviewing for.
You know, the president knows how to throw out a good tease. That's one of his hallmarks. Brian, good to see you. Glad you're. If you have to be anywhere in Thanksgiving, you're in nice warm weather. Good to see you. Well, a record number of shoppers showing there is some good coming out of the economy despite investors' fears. Let's talk about this with our guest. We have Fox Business Network Susan Lee. She's back with us, along with Fox News contributor Gary Kaltbaum and CFRA investment analyst Lindsay Bell. Lindsay, let me start with you. The numbers look good on retail sales, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is undoubtedly going to be a very strong holiday shopping season. The consumer is feeling confident. They feel like they have a little more money in their pockets thanks to the new tax policy that passed earlier or at the end of last year. They're out there shopping. But, you know, there are some cracks starting to show in the economy. The consumer has been really the backbone of this economy for the last couple years. But now we're starting to see, you know, durable goods numbers that came out this week. Business investing is slowing. That dovetails with what the Fed said. So these are some of the things that we're going to need to watch. Jobless claims are starting to rise. So while we're in a good position now, I think we need to just be a little sanguine.
Well, to say we're in a good position, I think, Gary, is an understatement. I mean, we have never in my lifetime had more jobs than people looking for jobs, which is what we've had for this past several months. We've got this roaring economy, at least compared to the Obama years. Why do they feel it's such a lousy world to live in?
It's called the shape of things to come. For me, it looks like the norm going forward is global growth is going to be worse than expected, and we're seeing it now. You got to remember, foreign markets topped out way in advance. Now you're getting Germany, which is the engine of Europe, contracting, Japan contracting, more evidence, oil prices. That's not down because just supply, it's because of demand. I think global growth is in some areas falling off a cliff. But I will say we are the powerhouse of this world, and I do give Trump credit for the tax cuts and the regulations. Sure. But the business cycle, you know, this talk that it's always going to be great, I don't think so. I do not think we're immune. I think we are seeing that right now. And look, we go into this week oversold, stretched and extended to the downside. Thanksgiving, normally seasonal strength, and we drop between 3% and 5%, selling relentless in all the economically sensitive areas. You know what's holding up best? The money's flowing into Procter & Gamble, Clorox, and recession-resistant areas, so the market's speaking loud and clear about where we're heading.
Think there's going to be a recession, by the way?
But definitely a slowdown. Recession's another story. I think we're going to get some recessions maybe in Asia and in Europe. I'm not sure about
Susan, what could turn things around?
Well, if we could get to the tax cuts reaffirmed, that would be great. Also, maybe because we do have President Trump meeting with President Xi Jinping at the G20 meeting in Buenos Aires this week. And if we get some sort of hopeful warming of ties, I think that could be some upside surprise for the markets.
Well, Lindsay, we also have gas prices down. And that's one reason I think people are shopping more, is that it's cheaper for them to go outside. There's a flip side to that, though, which is one of the great strengths of our economy right now has been this boom in exploration and finding fracking for oil. They're really hurt by the lowering prices. In fact, a lot of frackers say they're going to shut down their wells if it gets down to $50 a barrel for oil.
Yeah, certainly. Look, yeah, lower oil prices are really good for the consumer. They're good for airlines. They're good for the trucking businesses. But it's not good for big oil. And there is a level in oil prices where it's not good for the economy either. So you need oil prices to hold steady at a certain level for the economy to really chug forward.
You know, Gary, when you talk about oil prices, a lot of people don't care whether the big oil companies are making money or not, but they have to appreciate the fact that we are now pretty much of an independent country, or at least we're not as dependent on the oil sheiks as we used to be because of this boom in fracking and everything, because of the Trump administration taking the regs off. What happens if they start shutting down wells.
And also, by the way, the green energy, we're heading much more towards there, away from petroleum products for energy. So that's all.
But again,
good news.
it's the boom in carbon energy
Right.
that's been the secret to our success recently.
Look, for me, the bigger picture on this whole thing is the worry that it's forecasting going forward. The great news is, if we just stay right here for the next year at these prices, it's about $50 billion staying in the economy, in the consumer's pocket, not going to the pump. And that doesn't include, by the way, one of the strongest groups in the market right now is airlines. 1 + 1 = 2. So that's going on. So, yes, that is great news if it stays down. The worry is it is forecasting some ick as we move forward.
Ick, is that a technical term?
ICK. It's something to watch very closely.
ICK. All right. It must be an acronym for something. Thank you, gang. Thank you very much. Well, stores are happy that folks have started shopping heavily for the holidays. There is one store that Senator Bernie Sanders wants everybody to avoid. But is that going to hurt employees more than it helps them? But first, a humanitarian crisis in Tijuana. What the U.S. plans.
And documentaries and specials that tell the real stories behind the headlines.
Exclusively on Fox Nation.
Plus, get limited time available exclusive merchandise and Fox Nation special access to events with your favorite personalities. Stories done right, politics done right.
Fox Nation, opinion done right.
Become a founder now.
Sky News is reporting this morning that the migrant caravan is preparing to march to the U.S. border tomorrow with all those folks seeking asylum. But President Trump is reiterating he doesn't want them entering. Our guest now, National Border Patrol Council President Brandon Judd, with the very latest. Do we have enough personnel, Brandon, to deal with as many as 10,000 people invading our border?
No, absolutely not. If you look at the ports of entry, they can only handle between 50 to 100 applicants per day. So if you get this, and they're split up, you've got about 6,000 in Tijuana, you've got another 3,000 in Calexico, California. And so if they all rush the ports of entry, we just wouldn't have the personnel to handle it. And that's why you have to thank President Trump for having the foresight to put the military down on the border in the event that they do, in fact, rush the ports of entry, so that we will be able to stem that tide and hold these people back from actually breaking the line and coming into the United States.
But, you know, what would happen, even those who are opposed to people entering illegally, and I would say that would be most Americans, they don't want to see a deadly battle ensue. Is there something short of firing live rounds at the people as they come in that we can do to stop them from coming in illegally?
Well, certainly. Our ports of entry are a lot more hardened than, say, the ports of entry between the Guatemalan and Mexican border. I mean, we have a lot more infrastructure. We have the facilities. We do, in fact, have the walls directly east and west of the ports of entry. And so we're equipped to handle this. We just didn't have the personnel prior to the military coming onto the border. And so if you look at this, I go back to my meeting with the president on Monday of this week, and I saw somebody who is very concerned for the American public, that wants to do everything that he can to secure the border. He got a dumpster fire from the prior administration as far as illegal immigration went, and he's doing all that he can to secure the borders, which is what the American public wants.
Now, at the top of the show, at the top of this segment, I said this was an invasion. That word is in dispute. A lot of people suggest it's not so. But now even the Mexicans who are dealing or trying to deal with all of the Central Americans who are in Tijuana and other places along the border are calling it themselves an invasion. And apparently the Mexican authorities are dressed out in riot gear now and are attempting to help us in stemming the overflow. Do you think we have been or should be coordinating our activities with the Mexican authorities?
We are, in fact, coordinating our efforts with the Mexican authorities. But what's interesting is they're feeling the same pressure that we've been feeling for years. They're feeling what it is to have an influx of so many people in their cities at one time. This is something that we've had to deal with for years. Go back to Arizona in the mid-2000s and the illegal immigration crisis that was taking place back then. 2014 in the Rio Grande Valley sector, the immigration crisis that was taking place there, and the burden that it put on the taxpayer and the cities and the communities in those areas. The Mexican government is starting to feel that. The citizens in Tijuana, they're starting to see that, and they're starting to see exactly what illegal immigration causes in those cities. And we've been dealing with this for years. And again, go back and look at what President Trump is doing. He's trying to end this debate once and for all. And if it doesn't get ended, we're going to continue to talk about it for years to come. And it's going to be a point that the Republicans are going to be able to use year in and year out.
In the meantime, Brandon, you read these pathetic reports coming out of these temporary villages that have been set up of the children and the mothers sleeping in the streets. The rains are about to come. The situation is getting pretty dire. Who would have suggested, who would have presented these desperate people with a false paradigm that they were going to be able to somehow jump over a wall and get free entry into the U.S.?
I can't thank you enough for bringing up that point. If you look at these political activist groups like Sin Fronteras, they really do not care about the individuals that are coming up. All they care about is making this political statement, trying to get rid of our borders, when in reality, the people that they're trying to bring up, they're the ones that suffer. They're the people that put these migrants in the hands of smugglers, these dangerous criminals, these dangerous cartels, and yet they sit in their smug offices or in their smug homes saying that, well, what I'm doing is trying to help people. In reality, they're causing misery for these people, and they become the pawns for their political activism. And frankly, that's disgusting.
Well, I would encourage anybody who wants to hear more about this, read the Sky News reports, because the people on the ground there document exactly what you're saying, that the situation there is quite desperate. Brandon Judd, great to see you, my friend. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, David.
Well, Special Attorney General Matthew Whitaker may have received campaign donations while working as a federal employee. To former federal judge and independent counsel Ken Starr, author of Contempt, a memoir of the Clinton investigation. Good to see you, Ken. Thank you for being here.
Hey, David, good to see you. Thank you.
Let's talk first about this new news about the investigation of Mr. Whitaker. Could this actually force him out as acting attorney general?
Oh, I don't think so at all. It looks to me, from what I've seen, that this is one of those inadvertent failure to close down the campaign account in time. What will likely happen, and I've been through this sort of thing, I served as chief of staff to Attorney General Smith during the Reagan years, is he will have to simply pay this back. But unless there's any showing of intent, which I seriously doubt, this will be cleaned up. Call it a bureaucratic snafu.
Okay. Let's talk about his role as acting AG, and particularly his role overseeing the Mueller investigation. Exactly how much can he influence that investigation?
Well, under the regulations, David, he can influence major decisions, major steps. Now, that's not self-defining. That's a judgment call. But he cannot, under the regulations, interfere with the independence of the day-to-day operations. So let's just say, hypothetically, Robert Mueller was about to consider the indictment of one hypothetical Mary Rowe. He needs to go to the acting attorney general and say, here's what I'm intending to do, and this is the reason why I'm to do it. And under the regulations, and these regulations have been in place since the late years of the Clinton administration, that's within the attorney general's prerogative to say yay or nay.
Well, let's take another, even more specific hypothetical, if you will. Say Mr. Whitaker finds out that Mr. Mueller is looking into something with the Trump business empire that precedes his running for president. Could Mr. Whitaker say, hey, wait a minute, that's out of bounds. That's not what you were hired for?
Yes, he does have that authority. The Attorney General has that authority under the regulations. He will need to provide, in the fullness of time, an explanation to Congress as to why he made that decision. But he does have that authority.
Wow. Now, the president has, as we all know now, written out the answers to Mr. Mueller. I don't know if they're actually within Mr. Mueller's hands right now and if he's going over them. But what is your thinking about these written answers? Is there any danger for the president? Because clearly he went over them very carefully with his lawyers to make sure that there weren't any mistakes in there.
Well, there's always a danger, but obviously the president is well served by extremely able lawyers. They, I'm sure, were extremely careful about this. They know what they're doing. And in a way, it's a symbolic victory for the president in that he has not been summoned to testify, at least as far as we know, right? Maybe there's been an invitation to testify live. But written questions, written answers, and so forth are a safe and secure way of providing information to the special counsel. So, yes, these answers presumably are in Bob Mueller's hands, and so I would expect the classic give and take process. Hey, your answer to question number 3, Mr. President, with all due respect, raises a couple of other questions, and it'll be this negotiation back and forth process, I assume. And so it's a sort of stay tuned. But it does suggest, you're absolutely right, that Mr. Mueller is very far along in his investigation, at least with respect to the allegation of collusion. And again, I've seen nothing. I don't think the American people have seen anything to suggest that there was collusion.
No, zero on that. But there have been a lot of indictments for people, insiders inside the Beltway, for what they did as lobbyists, et cetera. There were some Russians who probably will never make it to trial because they're going to stay in Russia. But of all the information that Mr. Mueller has collected, and there are probably reams and reams of information.
Yes.
Is it conceivable that the written answers of the president would conflict in any way from the evidence that Mr. Mueller has collected?
Well, it's conceivable, but I don't think that it's likely. Again, anything can happen. Someone can go awry. You can have a witness who says X and the president says not X. But I think the process, especially with able lawyers, is being guided in such a way that the president is answering truthfully, I hope and pray, and that those answers, in fact, are not going to in any way implicate him. You mentioned the indictments very quickly. One of the lessons that has come out again with respect to the Mueller investigation is tell the truth, right? Indictments for perjury, guilty pleas for perjury, and so forth. And that, of course, was exactly the genesis of what unfolded during the Lewinsky phase, as I recount in my book, David.
All right. Judge Stark, great to see you, my friend. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you coming in.
My pleasure, David.
Thank you. And the book, by the way, is Contempt. Meanwhile, we were just talking about oil prices coming down and gas prices coming down in the United States. Well, in Europe, it's the opposite. For all of those who've spent any time in Europe, you might be able to appreciate, if not the way in which they're protesting, at least what they're protesting about. This is Paris, where the protests are getting quite violent. It's all about gas prices being very high over there. Now, in Europe, they are about twice what they are here, gas prices in the United States. There are so many extra taxes that they have, et cetera. But these are live shots from Paris of protests that clearly have gotten out of control. We don't know whether other groups have taken advantage of the legitimate concerns of Parisians about the price of gas, but it appears that has happened here. As you can see, what looks like tear gas, possibly fires in the street, and you can hear the sound in the background. Things are nasty. We're going to keep an eye on the situation. Again, these are live shots from Paris. It's about 4:31 in the afternoon there, so there's about another hour of daylight in Paris. You can actually see flames in the background, and that looks to be either a riot truck or perhaps a water truck trying to put out some of those flames. But situation very nasty. Well, Democrats calling for more investigations into the Trump administration, but pollsters are warning that all those probes could backfire on Democrats if they don't do it based on facts. Here to debate all this is GOP strategist Noel Nikpour, Catalina magazine publisher Kathy Aru, and former New York Congresswoman Nan Hayworth. Good to see you, ladies. Thank you for being here on this holiday weekend. Kathy, first to you. Axios, the website, magazine, however they refer to themselves, they put out a list of 85 potential investigations that the House could get into. 85.
Just getting started.
I'm just wondering, don't you think Americans are going to suffer from kind of investigation fatigue after 85 investigations?
I don't know. I mean, Americans spoke during the elections, and they did give the House to the Democrats. So it seems like They spoke. They want this administration to be investigated. And what's beautiful is, if you're a Democrat or a liberal, is that they do control the committees, and they control the Oversight Committee, who can do an investigation on the Mueller investigation. So we have like Chapter 1, now we're going to have Chapter 2.
So you have investigations on top of investigations on top.
Chapter 2 is coming.
Nan, I think that Americans, whether it's Democrats being investigated or Republicans, eventually that you do reach a point of investigation fatigue, don't you?
Absolutely. And what Americans voted on, I think, Kathy, and the Democrats, I do think in a lot of places pressed the case more effectively than the Republicans did, and the Republicans actually had the better case to make, was about health care. So this was what the American public was concerned about, I think, in these marginal districts, especially the swing districts, where they elected people whom they felt would not be partisans. They campaigned on being ecumenical, and now we're going to have a House leadership. And yes, people were warned, but they didn't heed it necessarily. That's going to be embroiling the Trump administration and everybody associated with it in endless investigations that will likely, although it will take weeks or months to determine this, not bear any fruit, but they will produce more heat than light and waste millions of dollars in time.
We've seen, Noel, some fruit from the Mueller investigations, but they're dealing with people, as I just talked to Judge Starr about, who, in Beltway insiders who did things before they got anywhere near the Trump administration, or Russians and who are doing stuff on their own.
Right.
This is stuff happening here. 85 investigations going into 2020. I would think, I'm just thinking that the president is hoping there will be this because it might help him get reelected.
Yeah, and either way you go, I think it's going to be good for Trump, and I'll tell you why. Because the constituents that elected a Democrat House, their number one issue was not Mueller investigation, it's health care. And there was a Gallup poll that came out a couple of days ago where it listed the number one issue on Americans' minds was immigration. And underneath that was health care. Right. Nowhere in the top three were, investigations, the Mueller investigations, which means that, if you're looking at what the people want, and the people voted in a Democratic House, they want immigration reform and they want health care, which tells me, you know what? Go ahead, play these games, have these 85 investigations, woohoo, because guess what? In 2 years, we're going to flip it back GOP.
Well, we all know that the golden ring, Kathy, for Democrats would be an impeachment, or at least enough evidence that's garnered for an impeachment, even if the Senate, which is still held by the Republicans, are not going to convict them, the president. But remember Maxine Waters? She repeated that word about 40 times at a fundraiser down in her home state.
She's the head of a committee.
So what's going to happen with the whole impeachment issue? Is there going to be any move for impeachment?
Well, Chairwoman Waters now, so it's not a joke. I mean, she now has.
She's on the fairly to her, she's on the banking committee, which probably wouldn't have a reason to impeach the president.
She'll find one.
But I mean, she's there and she has a powerful position now. So those who mocked her, she's in a powerful position.
So will Democrats go for impeachment?
Well, they might talk about it, and I think it is about 2020. It's who controls that news cycle. So as long as the Democrats control the news cycle, and I think the investigations are more about creating conversations that perhaps wouldn't have been had and creating doubt and questions, and that's going to drive the administration crazy and Trump crazy, and that might win 2020.
No, honestly, Nan, I think that would please the president. I think he would be happy because, he does have this kind of Machiavellian view that even if he's being attacked, he can turn that around and use that to strengthen his base.
Right. And potentially he can. David, what I would like to see, the president is very capable of articulating positions that indeed do reflect the compelling interests of the American people. I'd like to see him keep his high ground on issues that matter most and argue health care and argue immigration and stick to those and let the Democrats stay in the mud with their investigations. That will ill-serve them because that isn't what the American people are looking for.
Noel, quickly.
Well, I think this is going to do great things for fundraising on both sides because the longer they push for the investigation, Democrats will raise more money and Republicans will raise more money to stop it.
You know about fundraising.
That's right.
That's the truth. Coming up, Senator Bernie Sanders doubling down on his Stop Walmart Act during the busiest shopping week of the year. Could that jack up prices for shoppers next year?